Welcome back. I'm out here on the porch with our very good friend Linda Mines. Hard to believe it's the first time in all these many months that I'm seeing you face to face.
Face to face. I feel like that's just a special day. I'm tired of Zoom.
I'm tired of it too, but I'm so glad that you're able
Oh.
to be here this morning. And it's kind of interesting timing to me, the topic of the day, because we live in this day and age where it's easy to forget that the role of women was once very different. You
That's
see
true.
women in the workplace, running businesses, running households, you name it, we can do it now. There was a time not too many years ago that was not the case.
That's so very, very true. And this year we will be celebrating the 100th anniversary of Tennessee's vote on August the 18th to ratify the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, which was the tipping state. We became the perfect 36, and because of that vote that occurred in the Tennessee House of Representatives, the ratification of the 19th Amendment occurred nationwide. So
For those
wow.
of us who've lived a little 100 years ago, is kind of easy to put into perspective, right? When you're talking to teenagers, which you did for many years in your teachings at GPS, that's a different thing. That's ancient history to
It
them.
is.
For so many people watching who might be teaching their kids virtually this year, how do you put it into perspective? How do you get a child to understand the relevance of history?
I think one of the things that you can do with the 100th anniversary of the right to vote is to look at your own family. So if you are an 8th grader today, we're probably talking about your great grandmother or your great great grandmother. And you begin to look back and think about what was going on in the world in 1920. We had just come out of World War I. Well, gracious goodness, Vietnam is ancient history for students today because that was 50 years ago.
Right.
That's hard to imagine. World War II was 75. World War I was over 100 years. And I think telling stories is the best way to be able to really get children, young adults, to understand and to realize that what we accept as the norm today was outrageously rebellious 100 years ago.
So David and I were talking earlier. He knew you were coming and was sorry that he was not going to be able to be here to see you. And we are the same age, basically. And for both of us, one of the scenes that came to mind was from all things Mary Poppins.
Oh, yes.
Remember, votes for women. That, of course, was in England, but it was happening, somewhat simultaneously?
It was happening somewhat simultaneously here. And I have sometimes used that clip to say, because there's a wonderful scene between Mrs. Banks and Mr. Banks, and he's just totally unraveled because he finds out that she is marching with the suffragette
Right.
movement. To say that that's a lot of what it was like, even though the amendment will be ratified in 1920, it was never a certainty. For 26 consecutive U.S. Congresses, the right for women to vote had come up, and it had never come out of Congress even to come to the states for ratification.
So you talked about us remembering Tennessee's role in ratifying the amendment. Forgive my ignorance here, Linda, but did it work in such a way that it was up for ratification and different states did pass it, but some other states were behind the times?
That's so true. The way that our U.S. Constitution reads, if you want to propose an amendment to the Constitution, the most often used way is it has to pass through both houses of Congress, be signed by the president, and then it goes to the states. The states can choose to either ratify in their general assemblies, their Senate and their House, and then their governor signs it, or it can go directly to the people in a referendum. Well, that's really difficult. So most times when we've added an amendment to the Constitution, we've gone the state route, where the state, and in that case, as soon as it was voted on in 1919 in Congress, a number of states signed immediately, Michigan, New Jersey, others. And then there would be spurts. In early 1920, there were a number of states that ratified it sort of as a campaign to honor Susan B. Anthony, who had been one of the early suffrage movement workers. But then it came down to they had to have 36. We had 48 states. Ratification requires 3/4 of the number of states, a good reason to study math. And it came down to a handful of states. There were 12 that were left. Who was going to vote for it? Several states had already said no. What's what's important for people to remember is the House of Representatives and the Senates in each of those states that are voting are 100% men, except in U.S. Congress, Jeanette Rankin was serving in the House of Representatives.
From what state?
Wyoming. Wyoming came into the Union in the 1870s as the equality state, and from the very beginning allowed women to vote. They sort of did it for a dual purpose. One, it was a pioneer state, and two, they believed if they touted the equal rights of women that more families would move to Wyoming, because Wyoming was remote in the 1870s.
Okay, so if you could vote in Wyoming, and then the amendment has been passed through both houses, the president has signed it, it's been ratified by a number of states, but there are 12 remaining. If those 12 had not ratified it, if Tennessee and its story had not, because it was the final one,
It
right?
was the final one. It was the perfect 36.
So if that had not happened, would that have bumped it back, and it would, or could the states that ratified it still practice allowing women to vote?
The women could still be allowed to vote in those states in local elections or in certain elections like House of Representatives, but they could not vote in truly federal elections like presidential
because
elections.
it couldn't be a federal law.
In fact, here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, in Hamilton County, actually is a better way to say it, there were women in certain communities that were allowed to vote before the amendment was passed. The very first woman to vote in Hamilton County was Senator Newell's wife, Frances, who lived on Lookout Mountain. She was the Lookout Mountain passed an ordinance that you could vote in local elections. But she couldn't vote for president. And, you know, adding the right to vote in all elections, women may not be denied the right to vote on the basis of gender, cleared the path to every election.
So you've told me this story before, but my mind is not gifted as yours is. On Georgia Avenue,
Abby
right there,
Crawford Milton.
and she was instrumental in getting Tennessee's ratification.
She was very instrumental, and we will be celebrating her for the next week, and including when the Tennessee House of Representatives will do a reenactment of the 1920 vote with current members of the House, Speaker and others, playing the roles of of the person in that position in 1920. But Abby Crawford Milton was the first president of the Women's League of Vote, Tennessee Women's League of Vote. She was also president of the Tennessee Women's Suffrage Movement from here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I mean, she was crisscrossing the state. She visited every county, often with her 3 daughters in the back seat of her car.
What good motivation for her.
Well, and she often said that, how better to learn history than being a part of it.
So I mentioned Georgia Avenue right there, kind of almost in front of Warren and Griffin, actually, at the Dome building.
It's that little Phipps triangle.
Is a plaque in honor and recognition of her. But why there, Linda? Does that location mean anything?
It really doesn't have a significance, but it was a public park, and at that point, at the time that it was erected, Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Auditorium was one of the major draws in Chattanooga, and so many people would pass that. Plus, you know, McCallie and Georgia on the other side is the Hamilton County Courthouse.
Right.
So the hope was that as people were walking, they would see that. We will be festooning her plaque with yellow ribbons.
You know, that is one of the things I would encourage you to do. I'm going to put it on my list of things to do again this year. I did it with my older daughter many years ago. Want to do it with my younger one. It's just to take your own history tour and walk through Chattanooga. What you think you know and what you actually will learn are two different things, because when you're driving your car, you can't stop and read.
We are much better educated when we are really feet on the ground and able to see what's going on. And Chattanooga has so many historical markers. For those that may be doing virtual learning this fall, if you have an extra project that you might do with your children, that's a great thing. You can go to the Tennessee Historical Commission website. They have a list of all their markers. You can filter by Chattanooga and Hamilton County. Come up with your own list of, we're going to go visit the Revolutionary War soldier that is buried at the National Cemetery. We're going to follow the Women's Trail. We're going to choose it.
Interesting. Okay, now you talked about feet on the ground. You can literally put your feet on the ground and head over to Blood Assurance, because you're doing something really impressive.
And I'm going to hold this up so that whichever direction you can take a look at it. But one of the things that we decided to do, it's wonderful to talk about suffrage. You know, I'm a historian, and obviously I love to talk, and I love to talk about history. but doing something that sort of makes a difference. And one of the problems we have right now with the COVID virus, with all the other things that are going on, is that we have a shortage of plasma, of blood, and of platelets also. So joining together Blood Assurance, the Yellow Rose Suffrage Committee here in Chattanooga and Hamilton County, the Chattanooga Bar Association, and the Chief John Ross chapter of the DAR have a campaign, and you donate whatever you choose to donate, blood, platelets, plasma, but you donate in honor of the first woman in your family who cast her ballot.
Wow.
You get a certificate showing that you've done it, plus it will be up on their social media site if you choose to allow them to do that.
And that's happening one day only?
Well, no, it's starting tomorrow and will go through this week and all of next week.
That is a great idea. Are they asking, because of COVID, that you sign up for a donation time?
They are, and they are practicing every social distancing, hands, masks. They are so safe in what they're doing, but it's normally in pandemics when we most need the gift of life.
Right.
And it's a wonderful way to honor your family. By the way, today, at about the time that this will be airing, the Tennessee General Assembly, 100 years ago today, the 19th Amendment ratification hit the floor of the House and the Senate.
Well, I'm going to be having that dinner conversation at my household about, I think I'll go do that with my daughters as a way to pay tribute to who would be my grandmother, probably. Would have been the first
it's true for many of us. It's interesting. One of my grandmothers voted. The other one was a little bit too young at that point. But my great-grandmother York was apparently a feisty, vocal woman, and the story is she was one of the first to line up to vote. She and her husband disagreed politically, and when they left, she looked at him and said, "Well, I just canceled your vote," and smiled.
I think we'll leave it on that story.
It's a wonderful way to end.
But share your own stories, because that's what makes history so much fun, and it doesn't have to have taken place 100 years ago. If it was 5 months ago, that's still
true.
It will be history one day.
It will be.
So share your stories.
And vote, always.
Come back to me face to face again, will you?
I will,
Okay.
always.
We're back in a minute.
You love where you live and